Biden was knee deep in these things, or up to his eyeballs, I should say, in it, including the murders on Maidan Square conducted by these neo-Nazi gangs. So these things have to be investigated. And I think if Attorney General Barr is going to say, well, some of these things are past stories and we're not going to look at them, that's a mistake.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report. Just a quick update before I play this interview with Harley Schlanger. It's been a tough week. I've been MIA, and that's because on May 16th, YouTube gave me another unwarranted strike, this time for an interview I did in 2019 with Ole Damagard and Cody Snodgrass. That interview still lives on BitChute, but because YouTube gave me that strike, they locked my channel, so I couldn't alert all of you that I couldn't upload for a week. And that's the way YouTube operates. They're very draconian with these strikes. When they lock you out of your channel, you have no way to communicate with your subscribers. So 7 days has gone by, and today I got my channel back, and I want to thank you all for tuning in. Also, for those who don't know, I have been posting over the past week on my backup channel. I will leave the link below. Most of you don't even know I have a backup channel. That became really clear to me this week, so please take a minute to subscribe to the SGT Report backup channel on YouTube. I must say it's been a demoralizing week, and I got a really nice note today from Carol, who asked, "Are you okay?" Because again, I've been missing in action for a week because YouTube locked me out of my channel. So yes, I'm fine, and we'll continue to battle on in this fight for truth despite YouTube's best efforts to silence us completely. And since YouTube also demonetized this channel entirely a week and a half ago, just a quick word from this interview sponsor. Guys, it's critical to stay healthy and eat foods that give your body the nutrients it deserves. Have you tried ESS 60 yet? It's incredible stuff. This groundbreaking blend of olive oil and ESS 60 has been proven to help support immune systems with powerful antiviral and antioxidant properties. ESS 60 contains the highest quality C60, delivering more than 172 times the power of vitamin C. You can mix it in your salad, rub it on steak, dip your bread in it, or like I do, simply take a healthy spoonful. You can purchase ESS 60 in 3 delicious organic flavors: olive oil, avocado, and MCT coconut oil. So, to buy the highest purity ESS 60 oil directly from the lab, go to oliveoil60.com. That's www.oliveoil60.com, and tell them SGT Report sent you. And welcome back, friends. Thank you so much for finding us on YouTube. It's great to have you back, and it's wonderful to have back on the line my good and longtime friend, Harley Schlanger. How are you, Harley?
I'm fine, Sean. I guess YouTube's not going to give you a break, are they?
No, and I'm being shadow banned over on Twitter now, too. I was adding thousands of new followers a month, and that has now slowed to a trickle in the last week. So it feels to me like a coordinated effort between YouTube, Twitter, big social media giants to target SGT Report in this case specifically, but I'm not going to let it slow us down. We'll continue to post on the backup channel. We'll continue to post over at BitChute. Of course, people can find me directly at thephaser.com and more importantly, sgtreport.com. I have very important breaking information to share today, Harley, so let me do a screen share. Listen to this.
But we have to bear in mind what the Supreme Court recently reminded us of in the Bridgegate case. As the court said there's a difference between an abuse of power and a federal crime. Not every abuse of power, no matter how outrageous, is necessarily a federal crime. Now, as to President Obama and Vice President Biden, whatever their level of involvement, based on the information I have today, I don't expect Mr. Durham's work will lead to a criminal investigation of either man.
All right, I have some things I'd like to say about it, but I would really like your response to that first.
Well, I think this idea of a separation between an abuse of power and a crime is somewhat artificial. And I haven't read the Bridgegate decision, but if you have someone who has the authority of a president who conducts an investigation, who is hands-on involved in an investigation, as we now know the case with Obama is, thanks to what Sally Yates said in the interview she had with the House Intelligence Committee. We know that Obama was hands-on. We also knew that before Sally Yates because Lisa Page said it. in her text to Peter Strzok on September 2nd, 2016, when she said, POTUS wants to know what we're doing, everything we're doing. So Obama was minimally monitoring everything. Now, that means he knew his administration was conducting operations against a candidate of an other party. Now, if we saw something like this with Putin in Russia or with any other country, we'd be up in arms over it. But in this case, I'm afraid there's something with Barr that's going to hold this thing back from going all the way through. Now, I may be wrong. We'll see what Durham does. But Barr was pretty clear there that he's drawing a distinction between an abuse of power, which he's basically saying he would allow to occur unless there's a crime committed. Now, I would argue that the intervention against a presidential campaign and then against a president, which was continued by Obama's networks with his obvious go-ahead, that represents a crime, because it was a violation of the right of every voter who voted for Donald Trump to have Trump be president. Their rights were violated by the handcuffing of him, the political handcuffing of him by the Russiagate case. So I think Barr is making a very narrow distinction, which has more to do with the fear, I think, of stirring up the whole Obama question as a possible racial issue or whatever, than it does to the so-called rule of law, which Obama himself recently claimed he was shocked in the ruling by Barr on the Flynn case. And I think you probably know Sidney Powell said Obama doesn't know what he's talking about. But I'm disturbed by what I just heard from Attorney General Barr.
Look, you mentioned race, stirring up racial issues or anything like that regarding Obama. I think what they're afraid of is stirring up Social Security issues, maybe country of birth issues for Barry Soetoro. But beyond that, as it relates to that presser today from AG Barr, the first few minutes of that presser sounds very much like what we've heard from other presidents who come in. And for instance, in the case of Bush, saying, well, we're not going to look back at the misdeeds of the previous administration. That would be counterproductive. We're going to move forward as Americans. So again, we never see justice. We never see high crimes and misdemeanors punished, ever. So it begs the question now, what we just heard today from AG Barr. He says he wants a fair and impartial election between Biden and Trump. So he doesn't want the Department of Justice to get in there and mess that up. And I guess my question to you before we move on to two other names is, how do you feel about Biden skating free when we know he was involved in my opinion, pay-to-play or bribery or blackmail in the Ukraine?
Well, in Biden's case, the Ukraine situation sticks out like a proverbial sore thumb. You know, if you go beyond the question of Hunter Biden, which in itself should be fully investigated, but you ask yourself, what was Biden doing in Ukraine? He was working with a group of people, including George Soros, the National Endowment for Democracy, which has nothing to do with democracy, and with Victoria Nuland, who was an Undersecretary of State under Hillary Clinton for Eastern European Affairs, but is a long-term neocon married to Robert Kagan, who's one of the leading officials from the Project for a New American Century. Biden was coordinating with them and the US employees and government people on the ground to put in a regime that was the muscle for which came from neo-Nazi units. Now, everybody who knows something about the Ukraine revolution in February 2014 knows that it was neo-Nazis, the Bandera brigades, the Azov battalion, who owe their allegiance back to the Hitler SS units that were recruited in Ukraine in 1943 and 44. And that those are the people who shot up Maidan Square. Biden was working with them. Biden covered for them. And on top of that, Biden then brought his son in as part of an operation to run Ukraine after the coup and actually to loot Ukraine. Ukraine's economy completely collapsed. They turned it over to corrupt oligarchs like the one that Hunter Biden was working on or working for. And the situation was to turn Ukraine into a battleground between the East and the West. That was the policy of the Obama administration. So when you look back and say, well, let bygones be bygones, we're not going to litigate the past, what's to lead people to believe that Biden wouldn't do something again if he's elected president next November? Remember, with Obama and Biden, we had wars over and over. The Libya war, completely illegal, destroyed a prosperous country. The Syria war, whereas Michael Flynn reported as the Defense Intelligence Agency director, the Obama administration, through consultants, through the CIA, through other shadow government operations, was arming and funding terrorists who were killing Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Syria, the so-called moderate rebels. So Biden was knee-deep in these things, or up to his eyeballs, I should say, in it, including the murders on Maidan Square conducted by these neo-Nazi gangs. So these things have to be investigated. And I think if Attorney General Barr is going to say, well, some of these things are past stories and we're not going to look at them, that's a mistake, because you can learn from what was done in the past, the mentality, the worldview. And in Biden's case, it's the same geopolitics as George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And it's geopolitics which believes that the military-industrial complex makes the decisions for wars for the sake of economic and political concerns. And especially now, where we're in the midst of a whole series of crises, to say that you're going to let him skate through on this thing because of some argument about the difference between abuse of power and federal crimes, that's a mistake. Now, I'm sure President Trump will litigate this on the political campaign trail and do it quite effectively. But it's too bad that there won't be legal actions coming from this, especially since Obama has made it so clear that he's going out for Barr's head in his so-called discussion with the Obama alumni the other day.
All right, so here's the thing. I really love your measured response, and that's why I wanted to hear from you first, because this outrages me. Okay, I am so ticked, and Americans, red-blooded Americans, are so ticked by this crooked, broken system that seems to be run by a political mafia who are the puppets to an international criminal banking cabal, that we have all reached our boiling point. Okay, we've been boiled slowly like frogs, but we're not frogs, we're men. We're not mice, we're men, and we are pissed off that this continues to be the case. Our last hope for justice in this country is William Barr prosecuting deep state criminals. That's what the Q people have been waiting for. We keep being told, trust the plan, patriots are in control. Now we're hearing this today. So if he's going to let Obama and Biden skate, then the question begs to be asked, where do we sit with John Brennan and Hillary Clinton? Fusion GPS, the DNC, the baked dossier, the fake dossier. Where do you think we're going to end up with Brennan and Clinton? If Obama and Biden are allowed to skate, do you think for 1 minute that they're going to prosecute Brennan and Hillary Clinton?
Well, to tell you the truth, Sean, I'm not sure they will. And I think what you just said is absolutely the case. We're dealing with a corruption that's beyond the imagination of most Americans. I mean, people think of corruption as the guy who's on the take, gets a little bit of money, does some favors for people with power. They don't realize that the whole system, as you point out, is based on an absolutely unbelievable level of corruption, which is leaving whole sections of the world to starve because we're going to have food shortages. It's leaving people with no sense of security, which may mean we're going to have civil war and shooting in the streets. And I agree that letting this pass is a horrible event. Now, the only thing I can say is that this is where we have to turn outrage into action. Because if we simply allow ourselves to be angry about it, and look, there's a lot to be angry about, but if we don't organize those other people who should be angry but don't get it yet, then we're in a big disadvantage, because you've got the media pushing the line of the cabal. You've got not just the shadow government here, but you've got the so-called Five Eyes, the British Commonwealth network. You've got Europe has been completely castrated. There's not a political leader in Europe with any guts right now to really take this on. You look at Putin, who's got his own problems now. The world is a shipwreck, and the lifeboats aren't available. So we've got to start swimming like hell. And I do share your outrage, but I think it's important that people realize that we haven't yet seen what Durham's going to do. And I'm hoping that as this thing unfolds, because I've seen it already, I've seen the reaction to the Flynn case. And a lot of people who previously were not quite angry about what was going on recognized this level of corruption from the FBI as something far beyond what they had thought. So perhaps if Durham does move on Brennan, maybe on Hillary Clinton, but certainly Brennan, Clapper, Jim Comey. Comey deserves an orange jumpsuit already. But if we can get some action there, maybe these guys will spill the beans. Maybe it will encourage Barr to go ahead full throttle. But I agree, this was a very terrible development today with the Barr statement.
Well, we can move on, but my 2 cents on this is that we the people have been outraged for a long time, and we have moved. We have been active. We did get President Trump elected. We did show up by the tens of thousands, screaming at these rallies, "Lock her up," right? And so even President Trump has labeled the previous administration's actions against him to be treason. And now we have AG Barr saying there's a difference between abuse of power and a federal crime. This is exactly what we the people don't want to hear. We want to see real justice. We want to see real deep state criminals indicted and arrested and tried for their crimes. And I don't think we're going to see it. So we'll move on. We'll move on to something else that I'm really troubled by. I'm glad you're sitting down, Harley. You need to hear this. This is the president's own attorney, Alan Dershowitz, and I'm not sure you're going to even believe what he had to say in this interview with Jason Goodman. Listen to this.
Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you?
Yeah.
No right not to be vaccinated, meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
Could you hear that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So, look. This really gets down to the brass tacks of whether or not we are free at all in this country. Are we a free people or are we not? The president's own attorney just stated that we the people have no constitutional right to refuse a mandatory vaccine, in this case for coronavirus, if they roll one out because it's for the greater good. Harley, your thoughts on that statement from Alan Dershowitz?
I think the problem is it's impossible to trust the people who are saying these things to have the interests of the greater good in mind, because there's so much information out there about who's running this whole operation and where the money is going and the role of big pharma. But this gets to the deeper question, Sean, that you were just raising earlier. We have very little confidence in anything right now, because we've been lied to so much. We've been treated like idiots who have no rights. And I look at this as part of a bigger picture, which includes the fact that while they're saying they're going to help small businesses and help families, they're giving between $4 and $12 trillion to speculators. They're choosing the winners for them. So the speculators are going to be able to buy junk bonds on the nickel, on the dollar, with money from the Federal Reserve. They're going to pocket all the money. So everywhere you look, whether you're looking at the whole question of how the pandemic is unfolding, when you look at the question of the bailouts, when you look at the legal fight over Russiagate, you could take the attitude that we're lost. We don't have a dog in the hunt. But I think that's where the problem comes in. And you and I discussed this before, people who are somewhat fatalistic, that good guys are going to emerge and win this fight for us. I don't see good guys with the power to do that. I see there are good people. The American people, I think, are essentially, the reason their blood is boiling is because they don't like being treated unfairly. But the question is, what are the means that we actually have to shift the policies, to change the policies? And then you look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and realize that they're bought and sold down to almost the last man and women. So, it's a very demoralizing situation. And then you add to that what's happening to you, where you're trying to get the truth out and you're under attack from Twitter, from YouTube, and so on. So it's a very terrible situation right now. But I think that the more that we fight and the more people we bring in, we still have a chance to reverse this. I'm not of the opinion that there's some plan in place that someone else is going to do. But we, the American people, are going to have to keep going at it. And the question is not to put faith in Donald Trump, because as I've told you before, I'm not 100% sure where Trump stands on a lot of these things. But that if he sees he's always better when he's out talking to people and sees the anger in the population. Remember you were talking about this before, the campaign rallies in 2016 that seemed to fuel him and pushed him toward Glass-Steagall, pushed him toward locking up Hillary, pushed him toward going after Wall Street. Hopefully, there'll be an opportunity to do that again and to bring back that fire for justice, because it's there in the American people. It's just not there in the political and the elected officials or the cabal that's running things.
All right, I want to show you something else. We'll add a little levity to this conversation, but it's actually quite sad. It's not funny. It's really quite outrageous and sad. So let me show you this in a second. But let me comment first and say we see so many Democrat governors across the country acting like tyrants, and we see resistance in states like Michigan, where armed militia are showing up at the state capitol demanding the state be reopened. We see in the state of Wisconsin, that tyrant governor, his despotic actions being overturned by a Supreme Court that says you do not have the constitutional right to tell people to shut down their businesses in perpetuity. So now businesses, restaurants, etc. are opened in the state of Wisconsin, and when interviewed, that governor says he has no more power, no more cards to play, in his own words. So that's the good news there. Let me show you the bad news, and it is quite amusing. This from ABC News. This restaurant in Maryland intends to use bumper tables to keep customers 6 feet apart once it begins to take seated diners. I wrote, "Welcome to idiocracy, imposed on the land of the free and the home of the brave by international banking tyrants and their political minions who are now laughing their asses off right now." Watch this. Harley, do you think for 1 minute the people who control this world aren't laughing their asses off watching this? I mean, this is absolute insanity. This literally is like the movie Idiocracy.
Well, I think it convinces them that they were right to underestimate the people. You've got to realize these are people who are willing to kill large numbers through their policies. They've already done it with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, with the Federal Reserve. They've carried out policies that have led to large numbers of premature deaths, people who are dying out of demoralization, depression, lack of hunger, or lack of food because the food cartels won't deliver it. So I don't know if they're laughing at it, but I think they're very smug that they are capable of controlling the situation completely. And again, why do we go along with it? I mean, why don't people just not go to that restaurant? I mean, it's so silly, as you point out, to think that people would go along with something like that, walking around with what looks like a giant inner tube around them.
Yeah. Well, again, are we mice or are we men? And I think it's important to understand the history. You're very good at sharing the history with us and reminding us of the history, because we can all be easily fooled when we're born into this world and we don't know what happened in the previous 100 years. They don't teach it in the schools. So I want to share something really important with folks that I just found out from a video I was watching from Brendan O'Connell, and I think it's extremely important. I didn't know this. Now, I've been reporting about the Hand of the Queen, Justin Trudeau, banning assault weapons in Canada. So now, as we see this tyranny go global on the back of this pandemic, we're seeing the Hand of the Queen in Canada say, you no longer have a right to have an assault weapon. Now, they'd love to do that in this country too, but what I didn't know about Justin Trudeau, who when he was sworn in as Prime Minister, Harley, swore his allegiance and fealty and secrecy to the Queen and her Privy Council. That I knew. What I didn't know is this. Check this out. You probably knew this. I didn't. His father, Joseph Philippe Trudeau, was the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's the only former Prime Minister of Canada whose son then became Prime Minister of Canada. And get this, Harley, here's the punchline. I did not know this. Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre, was a communist leading a communist delegation to the Soviet Union back in 1952, and from there the first international discussion began to take place on something called the New World Order. I had no idea about that history. I will share the link to the most important presentation below where I got that information. It just stands to reason, Harley. This New World Order is real. They want our guns. There's a communist plan that's being rolled out globally on the back of this international banking cabal. And if you think I have any of that wrong, please do correct me, because it's a very fatalistic view on where we stand right now.
Well, Pierre Trudeau was a rotten character. His wife was completely crazy. And that's the parents of Justin Trudeau. And I didn't realize that he had once been a Communist Party member. But I do know a lot of the neocons all came out of the Trotskyite movement. So it was the left-wing communists. People like Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz and Gertrude Himmelfarb, the people who founded the movement that became the Project for the New American Century, which is this New World Order. So this has a long history of supposedly leftist radicals moving into the mainstream, trying to sound conservative, getting elected, and then launching wars that are destructive to the nation state. My point would be, my quarrel with you would be a minor one, but I don't see this as a communist as much as I see it as an imperial view. With the tradition going back to the Roman Empire, the Venetian Empire, the Anglo-Dutch Empire, and the efforts to make the United States part of the British Empire. Now, the British Empire has supported communism. They backed the Bolshevik Revolution. They supported the extreme Israeli, Greater Israel movement of Netanyahu. They're responsible for the absolutely insane Muslim jihadist movement of the Saudis, the Wahhabites. The British Empire was involved in the Russiagate operation against President Trump. They provoked Bush Jr. into the Iraq War. So what we're dealing with is a worldview which opposes the idea of national sovereignty and posits instead some form of world order in which you have a power over and above a nation state. Now, this is where we in the LaRouche movement have been waging the fight, and where we were so happy initially with President Trump bringing up the question of sovereignty. because sovereignty is what defines our Constitution. The idea that the American people will decide their form of government through our Constitution, through the Bill of Rights, and through the efforts over the years to act for the good of the people, not for the profits of the private interests. That's the American system. And it depends on sovereignty. What happens when you get these so-called world federalists, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, because the extreme free trade globalists portray themselves as Austrian school conservatives, but they worked hand in hand with John Maynard Keynes and his gang of British neoliberals. So we make the distinction around national sovereignty and who controls the credit. If the credit is not controlled by some instrument of the people, whether it's the Congress, the Treasury, the President, but if it's controlled by private banking, you don't have a nation anymore. And in a sense, you lose your freedom once you turn over the power to control credit. Because what we have today is a gang of speculative swindlers who control the Federal Reserve, who have determined that certain institutions are systemically important and must be protected, in other words, bailed out. And if the people survive or not isn't their concern. So I don't see it as a communist or left or right, but as an imperial policy where all of the rest of us are being treated as peons.
I actually agree with you on that assessment. Communism is one of the tools in the basket of these internationalists, and it is being used, right? So it's not communism specifically. Yes, communism is bad, but it is a tool that's being used to wage war against humanity. Just like the leftist agenda is a tool being used. Socialism is a tool. You're right, the printing presses, which they control, are being used as a tool. And at the end of the day, what we can take away from this conversation is there is a silent war being waged against humanity, but it's becoming increasingly less silent and quite a bit more obvious than it was just 3, 4, 5 months ago, Harley, in my view.
Well, Sean, that's the reason why we can be optimistic. In times like this, where the systemic instability takes over, and the so-called elite or establishment have no plan except killing, except war, except austerity, which destroys an economy. Whether the austerity is no money to spend for anything or shutting down a system, it still has the same effect. People don't have access to what they need to survive. Now, when you see every single day people like Adam Schiff lying, when you see Brennan and Clapper caught in their lies, see, I think we've had a very phenomenal breakthrough in these last 3 weeks around what Sidney Powell did in the Michael Flynn case. And it remains to be seen whether Judge Sullivan is completely controlled by this shadow government. It looks like he is. But what they showed was that what Horowitz reported, what's been reported by Devin Nunes and his committee and others, is the case, that the whole Russiagate story was a lie from the beginning. I just want to bring this point out because Sean Henry, the president of CrowdStrike, which is the only company that looked at the DNC computers, and CrowdStrike told the FBI there was Russian hacking. And yet when he testified under oath, the president of CrowdStrike, Sean Henry, said, well, we saw no evidence of the exfiltration of the emails. In other words, the emails being pulled out of the computers by someone else. In other words, what we said, what Bill Binney said, what a number of other patriots have said, the Russia story was a crock from the beginning. And here's where we see the problem. You still see Republicans saying, well, Russia was interfering in the election, because they don't want to give up the idea that we have to live in the world of the military-industrial complex where we're always going to be at war with someone. So the good news, as you point out, is that more and more of this is becoming public. The fact that Clapper said that he had no evidence of collusion. And yet he goes on his paid gig at, what is he on, CNN, and says over and over again, Trump colluded. The fact that these lies are so obvious should cause people to scratch their head and say, I wonder what this has to do with the fact that I can't pay my rent, my company's shut down, I don't have a job, my kids can't go to school. Pretty soon we're going to reach a boiling point. I don't think we're really there yet, Sean. I think people are getting there. I know you're there.
Yeah, you're right, Harley. I am. I'm riled up, but so are others. We can see what's going on in Michigan with the militia. We can see the Supreme Court in Wisconsin saying, you don't have the right to do this, tyrant governor. So if there's good news, it's that there are 50 states and not just one overreaching state, as we see in Spain, as we see in Italy, as we see in other parts of the world.
Well, actually, Sean, in Europe, we're seeing significant breaks again. I don't know if you heard this, but the German Constitutional Court ruled against the bailout policy of the European Union and the European Central Bank. The argument they gave was German sovereignty.
Good.
That the German basic law requires that financial purchases of bonds and things of that sort should have some public benefit. And they said the European Union and the European Central Bank is doing a Federal Reserve type bailout of bankrupt institutions. They're keeping companies afloat that should be put through bankruptcy, and they're undermining public economic and social stability. And so they ruled that the Bundesbank, the Bank of Germany, will not be buying European Central Bank bonds unless these problems are resolved. Now, without money from the Germans, the EU crashes. Now, some people are saying, well, that's typical, Germany's acting for its own interests. Well, that would be good, because under the European Union, no country is allowed to act in the interests of its own people. So if we're seeing a sovereignty movement emerge in Germany, we see it to some extent in Japan. We've definitely seen it in Russia. If we grab onto that in the United States, then we actually have the majority of the world's wealth and the world's population on our side. We just have to organize it.
All right. Well, that's the good news. Cup half full. I will leave folks with this, and it's just circling back to what we heard from AG Barr today. I'm not making a prediction. This is not a prediction. But my fear is, and I want to give a shout out to John Titus, who I just had on a week ago, and of course, because YouTube is channeling and funneling down my views, I think that interview only has like 42,000 views on it. It's on my main channel. Go watch it. At the end of that interview, I asked John if he's hopeful about the indictments of deep state criminals. Go listen to what he said. I think he may have hit the nail on the head. But just to finish up here, this is not a prediction. My fear is that after what we heard today from AG Barr, we may see a limited hangout of this Russiagate investigation. We may see people like Stroke and Page and maybe one of the Iwan brothers named and indicted. But my fear is, Harley, is that we're not going to see the big names like James Comey, like Hillary Clinton, like John Brennan. And what people hunger for more than anything right now in this country is justice. Without justice, we do not have a nation by and for the people. Final word from you.
Well, I certainly agree with you on that, but the question of justice now has to be a personal mission for all of us. That we can't sit back and say someone else is going to do it. If we want justice, we're going to have to grab it. And that's really always been the case. And in the past, the American people have shown the courage at key moments to do precisely that, to put in office people who reflect the interests of the general welfare as our Constitution specifies. So I think it's in our hands, and I would encourage people to engage in debate, discussion, and if you're riled up, good, go find other people and rile them up. Let's do it sensibly, because otherwise it will become an excuse to just start shutting everything down.
All right. Harley, how can people reach out to you? And you do an update now every single day, Monday through Friday on your YouTube channel, don't you?
Yeah, it's on our YouTube channel, LaRouche Pack. It's a morning update, 10, 12 minutes or so. Today it was a little bit longer, but that's available. Or people can write to me at harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to communicate with people, send you a free link to my blog page so you can see the articles I'm writing. And I'm in touch with a number of your fans, Sean, who are very riled up also and looking for ways to bring about a miracle to save the country.
Yeah, it does sometimes feel like that's what we need, is a miracle to save the country. All right. Well, guys, our guest has been Harley Schlanger. Harley, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for liking this information. Give this a like if you did like it. Share it within your sphere of influence. Spread the word. Please spread the word about my backup channel. It really seems to me at this point that YouTube is hell-bent on terminating my main channel. Hopefully that won't happen. If it does, you'll find me here. You'll find me on BitChute. You'll always find my latest at the very top of SGT Report, the antidote to corporate propaganda in Mockingbird Mainstream Media Lies 24/7. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. God bless. Bye-bye.
The middle class is being annihilated. It's like 9/11 in slow motion here. And money is being looted from the middle class and transferred to the 0.01%, to the money masters.